When 8-year-old Toby lost his last living relative, he found himself alone on the freezing streets. But instead of asking for money or food, he walked up to the toughest man in the city and asked a question that brought the entire Hells Angels club to tears. "Can you be my dad?" What happened next wasn't just a rescue. It was the birth of a new kind of brotherhood. Before we show you the incredible moment 50 bikers arrived to officially adopt Toby and the surprise they had waiting for him at the clubhouse, I have to ask, do you believe that family is about blood, or is it about who shows up when you need them most? Tell us your thoughts in the comments, and let us know where in the world you are watching from today. If you believe every child deserves a hero, hit that subscribe button right now. Now, let's go to a lonely street corner on a Tuesday night. Toby was a small boy with a shadow that seemed far too heavy for his 8-year-old shoulders. His entire world had shrunk to the size of a tattered, blue backpack and a pair of sneakers with soles so thin he could feel the biting chill of the wet pavement through his socks. For 3 long weeks, Toby had been a ghost in his own city. After his grandmother, his only guardian and the center of his universe, had passed away quietly in her sleep in their cramped, 4th-floor walk-up, Toby had been paralyzed by a very adult fear. He knew about the system. He had heard the horror stories from kids at school about being separated from siblings, sent to cold institutions with iron bars on the windows, and being passed around like a paycheck between foster homes where no one knew their name. Driven by a child's pure, instinctive fear of being caged, he had taken to the streets. He slept in the crawl space behind the local public library, a small, dusty nook where the heat from the building's massive furnace leaked through the bricks just enough to keep his fingers from turning blue. He survived on the scraps of humanity, half-eaten sandwiches left on park benches, and the occasional mistake order from a sympathetic hot dog vendor who saw the hunger in the boy's eyes and chose to look the other way. He learned to be silent, to be invisible, and to never cry out loud, because noise brought attention, and attention brought the people in suits. To Toby, the city was no longer a home. It was a labyrinth of predators and cold stone where a child could disappear without a trace. But the streets are no place for a child, especially as November's breath turned into needles of freezing sleet that soaked through even the thickest denim. Toby didn't want toys, and he didn't want a screen to play games on. He wanted what every child at the playground had: someone to hold his hand when the thunder rolled, someone to tell him that tomorrow was a promise, not a threat. He wanted a father. He wanted a shield against the dark that seemed to be closing in on him with every passing hour. Jax was a man who lived by a code written in iron, oil, and asphalt. As the president of the local Hells Angels chapter, he was used to the world flinching when he walked by. He was a mountain of a man, 6'4" of muscle, scars, and tattoos that told the story of a life lived on the ragged edge of society. To the average citizen, Jax was a figure of menace, the leader of a crew that rode machines that sounded like the end of the world. But behind the heavy leather vest and the dark, unreadable visor of his helmet was a man who carried his own hollow ache. Jax had lost his own father to a roadside accident when he was just 7 years old, and he had never forgotten the cold silence that followed, nor the way the world treated a boy with no one to stand behind him. He knew the feeling of being unwanted better than he knew the curves of the highway. On this particular Tuesday, as the rain turned into needles of freezing ice, Jax was fueling up his blacked-out Harley at a neon-lit station on the edge of the industrial district. The air smelled of ozone and gasoline. As he reached for the pump, he felt a small, timid tug on the sleeve of his heavy leather jacket. Jax turned, his hand instinctively dropping toward the knife on his belt, a reflex born of 1,000 street fights. But he froze. Standing there, soaked to the bone and shivering so hard his teeth sounded like a rhythmic clicking, was Toby. The boy was tiny, swallowed by a hoodie 3 sizes too large, his big, amber eyes looking up at the death's head patch on Jax's chest with a strange, startling lack of fear. It was the look of someone who had already seen the worst the world had to offer and decided that this giant man couldn't be any scarier than the hunger or the cold. Toby didn't ask for $1. He didn't ask for a burger. He looked at Jax, his voice small but remarkably clear over the howling wind and the hum of the gas pump. "Excuse me, sir, are you a king?" Toby asked, his breath a puff of white mist. Jax grunted, a rare, genuine smirk touching his lips beneath his beard. "Something like that, kid. Why? You looking for a kingdom to join?" Toby took a shaky breath, his small, blue-tinged hands balled into fists at his sides, as if to keep himself from collapsing under the weight of his own courage. "I don't have a dad anymore. My grandma said good men are hard to find, but they always look like they aren't afraid of anything. You look like you aren't afraid of the dark. I thought maybe, if you didn't have a son, could you be my dad? I can help clean your bike. I'm very quiet, and I don't eat much." The world seemed to stop moving. The sound of the city traffic faded into a dull, distant hum. Jax felt a physical crack in the armor around his heart. He looked at the boy, sopping wet, starving, and asking for a father from a stranger who looked like a nightmare to the rest of the world. He saw himself 30 years ago, standing on a similar curb, wondering who would catch him if he fell. "Kid," Jax said, his voice unusually thick, sounding like gravel being crushed. "You know who I am? You know what this patch on my back means. People run away from me for a living. I know you're the man who rides the thunder." Toby said simply, his eyes never leaving Jax's. "And the thunder always scares away the monsters. I'm tired of being scared, sir. I just want to go home, but I don't have one anymore." Jax didn't answer right away. He couldn't. He reached into his leather saddlebag, pulled out a dry, heavy flannel shirt, and wrapped it around the boy like a cocoon. Then, without a word, he picked Toby up. The boy weighed almost nothing, a skeleton of a child, and sat him on the warm, leather seat of the Harley. "I can't be your dad in 5 minutes, Toby," Jax whispered, his large hand gently steadying the boy's shoulder. "That's a title you gotta earn, and it's the hardest job in the world. But I can sure as hell make sure you're never cold or hungry again. Hold on to my belt, and don't you dare let go. We're going to the house." Jax didn't take Toby to a shelter or a police station. He knew that would mean the boy would be swallowed by the very system he feared, a system Jax himself had suffered through, where he was just a number on a file. He took him straight to the mother house, the fortified, brick heart of the Hells Angels territory. When the heavy steel gates groaned open, and Jax rode into the courtyard with a small, shivering child tucked against his back, the 30 bikers gathered there went dead silent. The clinking of tools in the garage stopped. The loud rock music was cut short. Big Mike, the chapter's sergeant-at-arms, stepped forward, wiping grease from his hands with a black rag. "Jax, who's the stowaway? You picking up hitchhikers, or did you shrink a prospect?" Jax climbed off the bike, keeping Toby close to his side. He looked at his brothers, men who had fought, bled, and gone to prison for one another. To the world, they were outlaws. To each other, they were the only family that mattered. "This is Toby," Jax declared, his voice booming in the quiet courtyard. "He asked me a question today that none of us has been man enough to answer in a long time. He asked for a father. He asked for a protector. He's been living behind the library in a crawl space while we've been sitting here in the heat, drinking beer. That ends tonight. This kid is under the wing." The bikers looked at Toby, then at each other. These were men who lived outside the laws of the state, but they lived inside a rigid circle of loyalty. To them, a child without a guardian was an insult to the code of the road. "He's staying here," Jax said, his tone leaving no room for debate. "And from this moment on, he doesn't just have one dad. He's got 30 of them. If anyone so much as looks at him wrong, they answer to the wing. Mike, get the kitchen open. Make that beef stew your mother taught you. T-Bone, find some clothes that actually fit him. We're having an emergency table session." Now, that night, the Hells Angels clubhouse. a place usually filled with the roar of engines, was transformed. It was filled with the savory scent of homemade stew and the quiet voice of a boy telling stories about how his grandmother taught him to read by looking at street signs. Toby ate 3 bowls of stew until his stomach was finally full, and eventually, he fell asleep in an oversized, leather armchair by the fireplace, draped in a Hell's Angels support blanket. But while Toby slept, the table session in the back room grew dark and serious. Jack sat at the head, his hands folded. They knew the law wouldn't let a group of patched bikers just keep a child. They knew social services would eventually come knocking. "We do this the right way," Jack said, his eyes fixed on the door where the boy was sleeping. "We don't hide him like a fugitive. We fix the system. We find out why he was left behind, and we make him legally ours. I want the best family lawyer in the state on retainer by morning. I don't care what it costs. We're going to be his legal guardians." However, as the club's digital specialist, Static, began to dig into Toby's meager past, he discovered a dark, jagged secret that turned the mood in the room from protective to lethal. Toby hadn't just slipped through the cracks by accident. His grandmother hadn't just been a lonely old woman. She had been a woman on the run for 7 years, moving from city to city. She had been hiding Toby from a dangerous man, a man named Victor, a high-level enforcer for a rival organized crime syndicate. Static pulled up a file that made Jax's blood run cold. Victor wasn't looking for Toby out of love or biological duty. He was looking for the boy because Toby's mother had been the daughter of a wealthy developer who died in a suspicious accident, and she had left behind a massive trust fund, a fortune in the tens of millions that could only be accessed by the boy's legal guardian. Victor was a predator, a man known for using accidents to solve his problems. He had been using private investigators to scour the city for weeks, leaving a trail of intimidated librarians and social workers in his wake. He didn't care about Brotherhood. He only cared about the millions. And as Static monitored the local frequencies, he turned to Jax with a grim expression. "Jax, someone just pinged the library's security feed. They found the backpack he left behind in the crawl space. Victor's crew is in the neighborhood. They've got a tail on the gas station where you found him. They're closing in, and they're not coming with a social worker. They're coming with a hit squad." Jax looked at the screen, his jaw tightening until the muscles stood out like cords on his neck. He looked at the sleeping boy in the next room, dreaming of a home he finally thought he had found. Jax reached over and picked up his cut, sliding it over his shoulders. "He wants to play for stakes?" Jax whispered, his voice like the low rumble of an approaching storm. "He thinks he's going to take a child for a paycheck? He's about to find out that you don't hunt a lion's cub in his own den. Mike, lock down the gate. T-Bone, get the cameras on a swivel. Every man on the perimeter. If Victor wants this boy, he's going to have to walk through a wall of fire and leather to get him." The war for Toby's future had just begun, and the Hells Angels were about to show the world exactly what happens when 30 outlaws decide to become one boy's father. The dawn didn't bring light to the industrial district. It only brought a thick, bone-chilling fog that clung to the reinforced steel gates of the Hells Angels' mother house like a damp shroud. Inside the fortified walls, the atmosphere was a sharp, electric contrast to the quiet, exhausted sleep of the 8-year-old boy currently curled up in the oversized leather armchair. The war room was thick with the scent of stale espresso, burnt tobacco, and the low-frequency hum of high-end servers. Static, the club's digital genius, hadn't moved from his monitors in over 6 hours. His fingers danced across the keys with a frantic grace, tracking the digital footprints of a man named Victor who was rapidly approaching their coordinates with lethal intent. "He's moving, Jax," Static muttered, his voice raspy from lack of sleep and too much caffeine. "I've got eyes on 3 black SUVs that just turned onto the main boulevard. They aren't trying to be subtle anymore. They're coming in hot. They know Toby is inside these walls, and they know exactly who we are. They're betting that a motorcycle club won't risk a federal spotlight, and a massive RICO investigation for a kid that isn't their blood. They think we'll hand him over to avoid the heat, but they don't know the difference between a gang and a brotherhood. Jax stood by the reinforced window, his eyes fixed on the security monitors that flickered with the movement of the outside world. He had spent the last few hours on a secure line with the club's primary legal counsel, a man named Marcus. Marcus wasn't a typical lawyer. He was a shark who specialized in high-stakes custody and impossible civil cases. The legal battle was already in motion, but Jax was a realist. He knew that a man like Victor didn't care about a judge's signature or a court-ordered mediation. Victor cared about the $40 million sitting in an offshore trust fund tied directly to Toby's DNA. Marcus says the trust fund is an iron vault, Jax told Big Mike and T-Bone, who were checking their gear in the corner. Toby is the sole heir to his mother's estate. If he disappears or suffers an unfortunate accident while in Victor's custody, the entire fortune defaults to the next of kin, which is Victor. This isn't a custody battle we're looking at on those monitors. It's a premeditated execution plot. They don't want the boy. They want his inheritance, and they want him gone so they can spend it in peace. They see a child as a line item on a ledger, but we see a soul that needs a home. Big Mike cracked his knuckles, the sound echoing through the room like a series of small-caliber gunshots. They think we're just outlaws who don't understand the value of a life. They don't realize that for this kid, we're a wall of fire. We've all been the unwanted kids at some point. That's why we wear the patch. To make sure no one ever feels that way again. If they want him, they have to walk through hell. Let them come. At exactly 7 a.m., as the fog began to lift just enough to reveal the gravel road, the three SUVs pulled up to the front gate. They didn't honk, and they didn't wait for an invitation. Four men stepped out of the lead vehicle, dressed in high-end tactical gear that tried to look like private security, but their eyes held the cold, empty flicker of career mercenaries. At the center of the group was Victor, a man with silver hair, a tailored coat, and a smile that looked more like a surgical scar. He stepped up to the intercom, his voice smooth, rehearsed, and dripping with a sickening, artificial concern. I believe you have something that belongs to the estate I represent. Victor's voice crackled through the courtyard speakers. I'm here for my son, Toby. I have the birth certificate in my hand, and I have a court-stamped order for his immediate return to my care. Let's not make this a scene for the neighbors, gentlemen. We all know how the local police and the FBI feel about your club's activities. Don't make this a kidnapping charge that you'll never beat in a court of law. Jax stepped out of the clubhouse's front door alone. He didn't carry a weapon in his hand, but his presence was a weapon in itself. He walked across the gravel courtyard with a slow, deliberate stride, his heavy engineer boots crunching with a sound of finality. He stopped exactly 10 feet from the gate, his hands hooked into his leather belt, looking at the men through the bars. The boy isn't yours, Victor, Jax said, his voice a low, vibrating rumble that seemed to come from the ground itself. I talked to him last night. He told me he doesn't have a dad. He told me he was hiding in a library crawl space because he was afraid of the monsters that were hunting him. And looking at you through these bars, I'd say that 8-year-old kid is a better judge of character than any court in this state. He sees you for exactly what you are, a man who would trade a child's life for a bigger bank account. Victor's smile didn't falter, but his eyes turned into chips of ice. Instincts are a funny thing, Jax, but the law is very specific about biological rights. I have the papers. You have a child who isn't yours. If those gates don't open in 60 seconds, I'll call the tactical units and the media. I don't think your brothers want to spend the next 20 years in a federal penitentiary for a boy they met at a gas station yesterday. Think about the club, Jax. Is one orphan worth the end of your legacy? The boy stayed here of his own free will because he was starving and terrified, Jax countered, his voice gaining a dangerous edge. And as for the law, you might want to check your tablet, Victor. Marcus just filed an emergency injunction in the Superior Court. Toby's grandmother didn't just pass away. She left a dying declaration in a video statement held in a safety deposit box. She details exactly why she fled 7 years ago. She names you. She describes the accidents you arranged for Toby's mother. The judge signed a temporary protection order 10 minutes ago. You aren't his father today, Victor. You're a person of interest in a double homicide investigation. The police are already on their way, but they aren't coming to help you. The mask of the grieving father finally shattered. Victor's face contorted with a primal, ugly fury. He reached for a sidearm tucked into his waistband, but he stopped dead when he heard a sound that chilled the mercenaries behind him to the bone. It was the synchronized roar of 30 Harleys starting at once inside the garage. The sound was deafening, a mechanical growl that promised absolute violence. From the shadows of the side bays, the Hells Angels emerged like a modern cavalry. They didn't come out with guns drawn. They came out as a massive wall of leather, chrome, and moving iron. They lined the interior of the fence, 30 men standing as a silent, immovable barrier between the predator and the prey. The vibration of the engines was so intense that it rattled the windows of Victor's SUVs. "You want to talk about belonging?" Jax asked, the iron gates slowly sliding open just enough for him to step out onto the neutral ground of the street. "Toby asked me to be his dad. He asked 30 men to be his shield. In our world, that's not a request, it's a blood oath. You can bring your lawyers, or you can bring your hitters, but you are never touching that boy again. If you so much as breathe the same air as him, you'll find out why they call us the angels of hell. We protect our own, and Toby is ours." Victor looked at the wall of bikers. He looked at the high-definition cameras mounted on the clubhouse, recording every second of the encounter for the legal team. He knew he had lost the element of surprise, and he knew the legal walls were closing in faster than he could flee. He realized that $40 million was worth nothing if he was dead or in a cage. He spat on the ground, his eyes burning with a promise of a war he couldn't win today. "This isn't over, Jax," Victor hissed as he backed toward his vehicle. "Money buys a lot of fire, and a lot of hungry people who don't care about your patches. You can't watch him forever. And a Brotherhood buys a lot of shovels," Jax replied, his face a mask of stone. "Don't come back to this zip code. Ever. Because the next time we meet, there won't be any lawyers present." Victor retreated into the darkness of his SUV, the tires screaming against the asphalt as the vehicle sped away. But Jax knew the victory was only the first step in a long journey. He walked back into the clubhouse, where Toby was sitting at the kitchen table, gingerly eating a bowl of cereal that Big Mike had prepared. The boy looked up, his eyes searching Jax's face for the truth, looking for the lie he had seen in adults his whole life. "Did the monsters go away, Jax?" Toby whispered, his spoon hovering over the bowl. Jax sat down beside him, his massive, tattooed hand gently covering Toby's small, pale one. "They're gone for now, Toby, and we're going to make sure they never find your trail again. But there's something we need to talk about. To stay truly safe, you can't live in a clubhouse forever. You need a home with a yard, a school, and a life that doesn't involve iron gates and surveillance cameras. You need to be a kid again, not a fugitive." Toby's bottom lip trembled, and he pulled his hand back slightly. "Do I have to go to the people in the suits now? Am I going to the home where they lock the doors and forget your name?" "No," Jax said, his voice firm and filled with a rare warmth. "We found someone. Do you remember the hot dog vendor near the park who used to give you the mistake orders? The one who used to give you an extra napkin and tell you to stay warm when it rained? He saw you when no one else did." Toby nodded slowly, a small smile touching his lips. "Mr. Henderson. He was always nice to me. He told me I had a good heart even when my face was dirty. Mr. Henderson and his wife have been trying to adopt a son for 5 years," Jax explained, leaning in so they were eye to eye. "They're good, honest people. They live in a quiet neighborhood with a big backyard and a dog that needs a best friend. We've already talked to them this morning. They want to meet you. And here's the best part. We're going to be your uncles. Every Saturday morning, the whole club is going to ride over. You'll have the biggest, loudest, and most protective family in the history of this city. No one will ever follow you again, because they'd have to go through all of us. The legal process that followed was grueling, but with the Hells Angels' resources and the grandmother's video evidence, Victor's empire crumbled like sand. He was hit with federal indictments that stripped him of his power and sent him to a maximum security cell for the rest of his natural life. Toby's trust fund was placed into a secure legal structure overseen by Marcus and the club, ensuring the boy would never want for anything, but also ensuring the money couldn't be touched by predators ever again. The Hendersons were overjoyed. They didn't care about the millions in the bank. They cared about the boy who had survived on nothing but hope and a library crawl space. They welcomed the Hells Angels into their lives, understanding that while they were the parents providing the home, the club was the security detail providing the peace. 6 months later, a row of 20 Harleys pulled up to a modest, sun-drenched suburban house. The neighbors watched in silent awe as the massive bikers climbed off their machines, but the fear was gone, replaced by a strange kind of respect. These men weren't there for trouble. They were carrying boxes of new books, a state-of-the-art bicycle, and a custom-made denim vest for a 9-year-old boy. Toby ran out of the front door, his face glowing with health, and threw his arms around Jax's waist. He was taller now, his cheeks full, the haunted shadow finally erased from his eyes. He looked up at the man who had answered his impossible question at a gas station on a rainy night. "Hey, Jax." Toby beamed, pointing at the clear blue sky. "Did you bring the thunder today?" Jax lifted the boy onto his shoulders, looking at the Hendersons, who stood on the porch with tears of joy in their eyes. He looked at his brothers, who were already arguing over who was going to teach Toby how to pitch a baseball and how to ride a bicycle without training wheels. "I brought the whole storm, kid." Jax laughed, the sound echoing through the quiet street. "I brought the whole storm." Toby had asked a stranger to be his father. What he got was a father's love, a family's fierce protection, and a brotherhood that proved that the toughest men in the world are the ones who know exactly how to hold a child's hand. The Hells Angels had saved a prince, and in return, Toby had saved their souls. He taught them that no matter how hard the road gets, there is always room for a little bit of heart. As the sun set over the suburban street, the roar of the engines sounded less like a threat and more like a lullaby. Toby was safe. Toby was home. And the Hells Angels had found a new purpose, guarding the future, one Saturday at a time. They had shown the world that being a man isn't about the patch you wear, but the promises you keep. What would you do if a child asked you for a home? Would you have the courage to stand against the monsters of the world? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We love hearing your stories of kindness. If you want more stories of justice, loyalty, and the bond of the road, hit that subscribe button and join our family. Embrace the journey. We know that the best heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear leather and ride the thunder. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next story of courage.